When it comes to incredible stories, one cannot fail to mention this one. Perhaps such incidents are worth knowing about them all over the world. This incident occurred in Italy in 1939. Leonarda Cianciulli, a soap merchant from Correggio, offered her fragrant goods to city residents and at the same time treated them to homemade cookies. But the ingredients of these products were somewhat peculiar, but this became known much later. Leonarda Cianciulli was born on November 14, 1893, in Montella, a city in the Italian province of Avellino. From an early age, the girl suffered from a lack of maternal love. Her mother Amelia really did not love her, since her daughter was the product of violence and therefore most often she treated her poorly and even beat her. The fact is that every time the mother looked at her daughter, she reminded her of the reason for her marriage to a man whom she did not love. Already at a very young age, Leonarda twice tried to commit suicide in order to stop enduring the bullying and beatings that had become unbearable for her. In 1914, having met a young man named Raphael Pansardi, a postal worker, the girl decided to marry him. More than anything, she wanted to leave her parents' home, so she didn't hesitate for a second in her decision. However, the parents were against this marriage, as they planned to marry their daughter to her cousin. After Leonarda's wedding, her mother was so angry with her that she cursed her for the rest of her days. Leonarda pretended that she didn't care and settled with her husband in the small town of Lora. It would seem that everything is fine in the couple's life, but just a few years after the wedding, Raphael began to drink constantly. A desperate need for money led Leonarda to prison, where she was placed for fraud, but even after years the family's situation did not improve. In 1930, a powerful earthquake of magnitude 7 occurred in the Italian region, which resulted in significant loss of life and massive destruction of buildings. Leonarda's house was also damaged by the earthquake and, left homeless, the family moved back to Correggio. Leonarda had a strange obsession with motherhood. Perhaps childhood trauma was the reason she had to go through 17 pregnancies. Although 13 children did not survive, 10 of them died in the first months of life, and she could not bear the remaining 3. As a result, only 4 children remained alive, whom Leonarda overprotected because she wanted to protect them from her mother's curse. One fortune teller, whom she turned to find out the future, said that she saw a prison in her right hand and a psychiatric hospital in her left. Leonarda mentioned that every night she dreamed of small white coffins, one after another being swallowed up by the earth. Unable to bear the loss of another child, she began reading books on palmistry, astronomy, spells, curses, and spiritualism. Meanwhile, Leonarda's husband's problems with alcohol became even more noticeable. There was absolutely nothing to feed the family. The couple constantly quarreled and eventually decided to divorce. Having broken off relations with her husband, Leonarda moved to the 3rd floor of a building on Vicavore Avenue with her 4 children, where, despite the bad omens that her mother spoke of, she managed to change the course of her life and opened a small store. It seemed that luck was on Leonard's side as never before. She successfully sold old clothes, soap, and even told fortunes with cards, since from an early age she was interested in studying the occult and black magic. Leonarda's friendly and helpful nature earned her great respect throughout the area. Her family seemed completely normal, with 4 children who behaved well at school and had many friends. Despite her divorce from her husband, Leonarda never forbade him to see his children. In addition, she loved to invite her neighbors for tea and dessert. Everything changed dramatically when one of Leonarda's sons, Giuseppe, her favorite, decided to go fight in the Italian army during the Second World War. From that moment on, the woman could not find a place for herself from excitement. The departure of her son gave her a feeling of endless melancholy and fear. Her superstitious nature forced her to convince herself that the time had come to help herself by turning to the occult arts. So Leonarda developed a sinister, creepy plan that included human sacrifices in order to protect the young man from any evil. To bring her ideas to life, Leonarda used tarot cards. It was the perfect way to get the attention of his victims. At some point, Leonarda realized that she would not have to look for and invite future victims to her home, because her 3 friends constantly came to her. Being single and not young women, they looked to the sympathetic Leonarda for consolation and advice. Among the 3 friends was Francesca Clementina Sovi, an unmarried woman who nursed children in her neighborhood. Virginia Cacioppo, a former opera singer who managed to travel to different parts of the world and achieved a certain reputation. And Ermelinda Faustina Seti, a semi-literate hillbilly with a submissive but quarrelsome character. All 3 met every now and then at Leonarda's house, where they chatted all evening long. The fear of losing his son forced Leonard to act immediately. She made a decision and promised herself to make it happen before it was too late and she would never be able to see her beloved son. The first victim, Ermelinda Faustina, died at the hands of Leonarda on December 17, 1939. In her last conversations with her friend, Leonarda predicted her imminent marriage. And then one day Ermelinda came to visit Leonarda again, and since then no one has seen her again. On the eve of that day, Ermelinda Faustina Seti asked her neighbor if she could take care of her cat for a few days, since she had to leave. The cards laid out by Leonarda promised the woman a meeting with the love of her life. That day, December 17th, she took a long time to preen herself. Ermelinda put on a complex hairstyle on her head, did makeup and sprayed perfume all over her body. The woman looked excited. She could not restrain herself and admitted to some acquaintances that she was getting married and moving to a city in southern Italy. The last time the residents of Correggio saw her was when she entered Leonarda's house. Once there, she disappeared. However, her disappearance did not raise suspicions, as many thought that she had probably left to meet the love of her life and had stopped by to say goodbye to her best friend. When in reality everything was completely different. Leonarda made her friend believe that she would meet her future husband in the town of Pula by saying that this man was her own friend who allegedly dreamed of meeting Ermelinda. Seizing the moment, Leonarda invited her friend to take care of her property during her departure and forced her to sign a notarized letter stating that she, Leonarda, would remain in charge of her savings. Leonarda asked Ermelinda not to tell anyone anything in order to avoid gossip and misfortune, but she advised her to write letters to her friends so that as soon as she left, her friend could convey news from her to them. Leonarda also added that she would be glad if, on the eve of her departure, Ermelinda came to her to say goodbye. When Leonarda met her friend at the door, she looked happy and smart. The hostess offered the guest a glass of wine, into which she mixed sleeping pills. As soon as Ermelinda fell asleep, Leonarda dragged her into a small room, took an axe and chopped her body into 9 pieces. After that, she took 2 pre-prepared basins, put the body fragments into them, and then filled a cauldron with water, which she bought specifically for soap making, and put it on the fire with water to boil. Then she added 7 kilograms of caustic soda and body parts to the cauldron. Leonarda stirred the mixture until the fragments of the victim's body dissolved and turned black. She then poured the resulting mixture into buckets to let it steep. Having looked at the resulting mixture, Leonard thought a little and said, "Now we have enough soap for 6 months." As for the victim's blood, Leonarda waited until it coagulated and placed it in the oven to dry. Then the criminal mixed this ingredient with flour, added sugar, chocolate, milk and eggs, mixed everything thoroughly, baked crispy cookies, which she distributed to her next guests, and also ate herself and treated the children. Ermelinda's disappearance went unnoticed. The neighbors remembered that she was going to go live in Pola, and since she was not married, no one looked for her and did not suspect anything was wrong. Everything went as usual, but 9 months later, on September 5, 1940, Leonarda decided to repeat her plan and make another sacrifice. Francesca Clementina Sovi became her. Shortly before the next murder, Leonarda guessed to her friend that she would soon leave Correggio to take the place of director of a boarding school in Piacenza, because one of her friends, the school director, was ready to take her as his replacement. Just like the first time, Leonarda advised her second victim not to share the good news with anyone, so as not to scare away her luck. Instead, she recommended that Francesca send postcards to her family saying that she would have to leave because she had received a place in Piacenza. This time, Leonarda also offered her friend her candidacy as the manager of her property and responsible for their sale if necessary. Then everything went according to the same plan. Francesca dropped in to say goodbye to Leonarda, drank wine with sleeping pills, and then the criminal killed her, dismembered her and included her in the soap and recipe for the already beloved cookies. The disappearance of Francesca Clementina did not arouse any suspicion, since all her friends knew that she had found a good job and did not have time to say goodbye, except that she entrusted her savings to Leonarda. 2 months later, on November 30, 1940, when Leonarda decided that her sacrifices were really working, she decided to carry out her plan for the third time. She chose 59-year-old soprano Virginia Cacioppo as her victim. According to the maps, Virginia's fortunes were about to change. Leonarda informed her that the theater manager in Florence needed a secretary with knowledge in the field of singing, and supposedly he was ready to give this position to Virginia. Next, Leonarda asked her friend not to tell anyone anything, as was the case in 2 previous cases. But the future victim immediately began sharing the great news with her closest people. At noon on November 30th, Leonarda opened the door of her house for Virginia. She would have known that at that moment Virginia's daughter-in-law watched her enter the house, but never came out again. Everything was done the same as the previous 2 times, except that now Leonarda acted with much greater knowledge of the matter. Now she not only threw the body into the boiling cauldron, but also added a bottle of cologne to it. The smell that the brew emitted was magnificent. After a few hours, Leonard managed to make an excellent soap with a creamy texture. Then she returned to preparing her desserts, so popular and delicious that people who tried them said that they were a real masterpiece, and Leonarda claimed that we were talking about her signature recipe. A few days later, Leonarda began distributing bars of soap to her neighbors and also treating them to her famous cookies. The woman was proud of the recognition of the town residents, who saw her as a kind woman always ready to help. Meanwhile, Virginia's daughter-in-law Albertina Fanti became concerned about her mother-in-law's sudden disappearance. There was not even an address where she could be found, and this seemed strange to Albertina, because usually her relative behaved completely differently. Then she decided to officially report the woman's disappearance to the police chief of Correggio. During interrogation, Albertina Fanti mentioned that the last time she saw Virginia, she went to see Leonard Cianciulli. During the investigations, it turned out that 2 other friends of Leonarda had disappeared without a trace. Further searches revealed the nuances of this criminal incident, which was not only surprising, but also caused collective horror throughout the area. Literally all the residents managed to eat Leonarda's cookies and bathe with soap that contained the bodies of Leonarda's victims. During a search of Leonarda's home, police found jewelry and other belongings of the 3 victims hidden under the brickwork. In addition, they were able to find the dentures of the 3 women. In the room they found 3 axes, several knives and a cauldron in which the criminal had immersed the bodies to make soap from them. All these tools and utensils are currently in the Criminological Museum in Rome. Seeing that she had been brought into the open, Leonarda confessed to her crimes, revealing her course of action, which began with convincing the victims that a bright future awaited them in the form of a desired job or love. Once the victims fell into the trap, they were ready to leave all their property to Leonarda. Then she treated them to a glass of wine with sleeping pills. When the women fell asleep to Leonard, she took an axe and killed them, then proceeded to cut up the bodies in a basin, so that she could then make soap from them. She baked her desserts from the blood of the victims. After the search, investigators contacted the 2 men to whom Clementine and Virginia intended to go, as at some point they thought that they were talking about a criminal group. But after further investigation, those men were excluded from the case. They of course did not suspect anything. Leonarda's son was also arrested for alleged complicity in the crime, since the police did not believe that the woman acted alone. Having served 5 years in prison before trial, her son Giuseppe was released due to lack of evidence. Leonarda tried to convince the jury that her son had nothing to do with the crime and that all responsibility lay with her. She was taken to the morgue in order to exclude her son from the case and prove that only she was involved in the crime. Incredibly, it only took Leonarda 12 minutes to autopsy her body. The trial began on June 12, 1946. During the trial, Leonarda tried to justify her actions by saying that she was paying a blood tribute in connection with the memory of her departed mother. Her mother appeared in her dreams and threatened to take the lives of her children unless she sacrificed the innocent lives of others in return. At one point, the medical examiner said that Leonarda would not have been able to turn the bodies of her victims into soap, but then the woman stood up and said, "If anyone present in this court brings me a body of any age, I can easily prove everything." A few days after the trial began, Leonarda was found guilty and sentenced to 30 years in prison and 3 years in a women's psychiatric prison near Suole, where she died of a stroke on October 15, 1970. At the age of 77 years. During her life and after her death, many books were published about her case, among which the most famous was The Confession of a Bitter Soul. Leonarda received the nickname of the Soapmaker from Correggio. Before us as an impressive case, no one could have imagined that a woman whom everyone knew as a good person would be able to commit such acts and even involve the entire neighborhood in them. Forcing people to eat cookies and wash themselves with soap containing the bodies of her victims. On December 31, 2020, a 23-year-old flight attendant named Christine de Serra died under very strange circumstances. Thanks to CCTV cameras, the police had 12 suspects, and when this case was revealed, the entire public was shocked. Christine de Serra was born on April 13, 1997. She graduated from college with a degree in media communications and decided to become a flight attendant at one of the largest international airlines, PAL Express. It was a highly respected profession and provided Christine with stability and constant adventure. And when she wasn't traveling the world, she lived in her hometown of Manila. Christine also led a very public life online. She had almost 200,000 followers on TikTok. The videos she posted were useful, fun and funny. In them, she joked with friends or made faces while in the back of the plane. Looking at accounts on social networks, it is impossible to tell what kind of person he really is. But Christine seemed to be a kind, cheerful, loving and open person who loved to make others laugh. So Christine lived a life of travel and smiles for several years, increasing her fan base and having a blast. But everything changed on the fateful New Year's Eve. December 31, 2020. Christine met up with three of her friends named Valentine, Ray and Edward at the City Garden Grand Hotel in Manila. It was New Year's Eve, so everyone was drinking alcohol and hoping the party would go on late into the night. And then Christine's friends started inviting other men, and the party quickly grew. Soon, 9 more guys came to the room where they were, including the manager who worked at the hotel. And when midnight came, a very drunk Christine was the only woman in a room with 12 men. Just after midnight, the girl called her mother to wish her a happy new year. The mom says Christine didn't seem too drunk at the time and she told her she was having a good time with her work colleagues. Her mother did not even suspect that this call would be the last. As the party continued, the participants drank more and more alcohol. In fact, they had booked several hotel rooms and therefore walked back and forth throughout the night, allowing the hotel's CCTV cameras to capture them as they walked through the hallways. The footage shows the men laughing, and Christine walking around without shoes and constantly smiling. Things continued like this for most of the night. But there were 2 very strange moments that were caught on camera. At 0252, Christine was seen walking back to the room where everyone else was, with one of her friends named Valentine Rosales. They were alone, it was late and they were both pretty drunk and something strange happened right before entering the room. Valentine and Christine stopped at the door and kissed. The kiss only lasted a few seconds, then they laughed about it and went inside. The second interesting moment occurred at 413 am. The footage shows one of the guys carrying Christine back into the room, with her head tilted in a way that suggests she is not fully conscious. It's not clear whether she's asleep or just incredibly drunk, but either way, the girl couldn't walk or even stand. Her friend carried her to the room where their group had originally started the party. This was the last time Christine was seen alive, and from this point on the story gets a little confusing. The next morning, one of Christine's friends reported that he found her sleeping in the bathroom around 10 a.m. Why he didn't move her or check to see if she was okay will forever be a mystery, but he claimed she was breathing at the time. Later that day, another friend came into the bathroom and found that she was no longer breathing and that her lips were blue. Obviously, this was a terrible sign, so Christine's friend immediately alerted the hotel staff, and the employee performed CPR on the girl until the ambulance arrived, but it was hopeless. When the doctors finally showed up, they immediately put her in a wheelchair to take her to the hospital. However, Christine's limp body fell out of the chair and they had to lift her from the floor several times. After the girl was finally brought to the hospital, it became clear that help came too late. Christine was declared dead, and while it was undoubtedly a tragic end, her death also served as the unexpected start of wild hardships for almost everyone else involved. The initial public reaction to Christine's death was outrage. Ljudi Satali, Sitio Musaini, S. Katorimi bila divuska nakakali I zaprisenimi vesistvami, Iznasilivali I Ubili. Suspicions against these men grew sharply. Then on January 4th, Philippine police issued a statement that they had registered the event as a homicide and that the men Christine was with would be found and arrested. This statement further increased the public outcry, and Christine's friends instantly became villains. The hashtag went viral on social media and controversy erupted across the internet about whether Christine was brutally murdered or whether it was her own fault for having so much fun. Senator and legendary boxer Manny Pacquiao even offered tens of thousands of dollars as a reward to anyone who could provide information about this death. And at the time, all signs seemed to point to the girl's friends, until some holes started appearing in the story. Firstly, all the accused men appeared in the media and declared their innocence. They said they were heartbroken and hurt that they didn't help Christine, but they had nothing to do with her death. The guys also denied accusations of using illegal substances and violence against Christine. Also, all 12 men said they were gay. Gregorio de Guzman was one of the 3 main suspects cited by the news site. He said each of the 12 defendants was gay. It seems to me that this is why she loved to communicate with us. She said more than once that she felt comfortable with us. This certainly changed the mood of public discussion surrounding Christine's death, but did not remove suspicion from the men. Several sources cited the video of the girl kissing Valentin as evidence that the men were lying. Valentin later stated that it was Christine who initiated this kiss, and he simply responded to it out of politeness. There were also several mysterious bruises all over Christine's lower body. At first people thought this was proof that the men were wrong, but then more information emerged from emergency workers. It appears that the bruises may have appeared when Christine's body fell out of the wheelchair. So despite the police charges and the public outcry, the Christine case was becoming quite controversial, but that's when the autopsy report changed everything. According to the report, Christine died of natural causes. It turned out that she probably had undiagnosed cardiac hypertension and that her heart weighed almost twice as much as that of a normal person. And combined with the excessive drinking Christine reportedly did that night, it likely led to an aortic aneurysm. An aortic aneurysm is a limited sac-like bulge of the aortic wall or an expansion of the entire aorta by more than 1.5 times the normal size. This pathology is the second most common among aortic diseases after atherosclerosis. This clearly confused everyone following the case, especially the police, who seemed most determined to perpetuate the murder theory. A second autopsy was therefore ordered and, although the results were not made public, they appeared to confirm the results of the first autopsy. All male suspects were left alone. Many of Christine's friends and family still believe to this day that she was killed by these men and that there is more to the story. And some claim that Christine was killed by illegal substances and large amounts of alcohol. Do you believe that Christine could have died of natural causes or that someone managed to get away with murder? Write your answers in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Megan Newborough is a 23-years-old female from Nuneaton, United Kingdom. She was surrounded by a loving family and loyal friends who truly believed Megan was a unique person. She was always smiling and only saw the good in people. She worked in HR for a company that, oddly enough, made bricks. It wasn't the most exciting job in the world, but she got along well with her coworkers and enjoyed going to work every day. She was good at her job, liked by everyone and expected to be promoted soon, which was very convenient because she was going to buy a house. And in principle, the girl was content with her life. Her mother described Megan as a person capable of charming anyone who met her. And that attraction helped her start a relationship with a coworker. Friday, August 6, 2021. Megan walked out of her parents' house in Nuneaton. It was about 7:30 p.m., but it was still light outside. It was the middle of summer. Megan was making the most of it because the previous year had been filled with COVID quarantines and now she wanted to make up for lost time. She jumped into her car, a white Citroën C3, and the moment was captured by a camera at the doorbell at her parents' house. When she left, she told her family that she was going to a meeting with her coworker and should be back before sundown. That was only partly true. In fact, she had been in a relationship with this coworker for 6 weeks and had gone on a romantic date, not a simple outing. Her boyfriend lived not far away and Megan was anxiously awaiting this meeting, as was her chosen one. Unfortunately, when the girl said goodbye to her family, no one thought that it would be their last meeting. The next morning, Megan never returned home. Her family started to get really worried. They knew it wasn't like the girl. After all, if she had stayed overnight at someone's house, she would have been sure to tell them over the phone. Her parents reported her missing to police at 12 noon on Saturday, August 7th. They told police that the last thing they knew was that she had gone for a walk with a man from work named Ross McCullum. McCullum was a 30-year-old lab technician who lived with his parents on Windsors Close in Covell Winter. Close is a quiet, pleasant street where nothing untoward happens, but just a couple hours later the police arrived to look for Megan. Police arrived at the home of Ross's parents looking for information, but they were unable to find either Megan or Ross there. Turns out Ross was in Loughborough at the time. Ross's father helped police contact him, and it turned out that the boy was planning to have a drink at a bar in another city at that point. And also that Megan had indeed visited him the day before, but only for an hour and left around 8 p.m. because someone had called her. Ross said that when the girl left he tried to call her, but she said she was driving and couldn't talk to him and they were unable to communicate. And after that, he sent her a bunch of texts that she never responded to. It was clear from the conversation that the guy was really worried about the girl's disappearance, but he said that they kept their relationship a secret from her parents. So he didn't contact them and just waited. The police officer asked if Megan knew anyone from Loughborough, but Ross replied that he didn't know that because the girl had a lot of friends and he wasn't sure. The conversation also revealed that Ross did not have a driver's license, but that he could come to the police station anytime he was told to. Ross also described in vivid detail where he was going that evening and what time Megan left. Thanks to these details, the police were able to formulate a number of different theories. While the police were busy investigating, Megan's parents wasted no time and tried to find their daughter themselves. They tracked her cell phone with an app and moved out to find her. It reassured them a little that the phone was still on. But unfortunately, finding the phone only spooked them. It turned out that Megan's phone was lying on Hermitage Road in Utica inside a deep, large, sprawling hedge surrounded by blackberries at the edge of a field. Megan was no different from girls her age, and that meant she couldn't just throw her phone away in a place like this. It indicated that something terrible had happened to her. Just 13 hours after Megan was reported missing, police made an arrest. On August 7 at 11:35 p.m., Ross McCullum was arrested on suspicion of kidnapping. At the time of his arrest, Ross was visibly very upset and offered no resistance. He even immediately admitted where Megan was and that the girl was already dead. Police immediately advanced to the address given by Ross, Charlie Route, and the location was near Loughborough. When they arrived, they managed to find Megan, but she had suffered the same fate as her phone. She was also lying deep in the overgrown hedge. McCullum's charge was changed to suspicion of murder. Megan's abandoned car was found on Sunday, August 8, around 2 a.m. The car was abandoned. Megan's blood was found on the passenger seat of the car. The keys were found nearby, also covered in blood. The car was the final piece of the puzzle. On August 10, 2021, Ross McCullum was charged with the murder of Megan Newborough, and he immediately confessed to everything, agreeing to fill out all the necessary paperwork. On the day of the disappearance, August 7, Megan and Ross met at his parents' house. But at some point the date went wrong and Ross became furious. He strangled Megan, and when she passed out, he panicked. Unsure if the girl was really dead, he slit her throat with a knife. Ross wiped off the blood with clothes and sheets, then changed Megan into a change of clothes, put the girl in her car at 9 p.m. He didn't know how to drive, but he realized he had no other choice. So he drove the girl and the car to the nearest secluded spot. He threw the partially clothed Megan over a wall on Charlie Road. And just before 10 p.m. he dumped the girl's phone on Hermitage Road. And then dumped the car outside the fitness center in the parking lot of Loughborough College. In the same parking lot, Ross disposed of the bloody clothes he was wearing and cleaned up the crime scene. The guy then called a cab and went home. He asked to be dropped off a little earlier and he reached home on foot around 10:45 p.m. The police now had the entire chronology of the crime, but they still did not know the motive for this brutal murder. The real question was what could have gone wrong that Ross killed the girl he was dating. Ross revealed that it was caused by his childhood trauma. He tried to plead guilty to manslaughter, justified by a temporary loss of control. Something like this requires a really serious trigger to cause such blind rage. Ross revealed that Megan had talked to him about the future. He felt awkward and told her to shut up, but she playfully slapped his leg in response. After which she pulled him to her and whispered, "Come to me." That phrase was enough to make Ross stop realizing what he was doing. He explained that the whole situation made him remember an unpleasant situation from his childhood. The guy attacked Megan first with his hands and then with a knife. But he killed the girl because he was afraid that when she woke up, she would tell about his actions. This reason could not have been sufficient for such an atrocious crime. The Crown Prosecution Service announced that it did not qualify as a trigger. At the same time, the defense had a doctor who could corroborate Ross's statement about his loss of control due to post-traumatic stress disorder. However, the question was raised as to when the effects of his injury should have ended if he lost control. If he lost control when he attacked the girl with his hands, did he regain control when he decided to stab her with the knife? Because of this whole situation, many questions arose and the case went to trial. The trial began in November 2022. The prosecution said that the girl had intended just to have a nice romantic evening. But 40 minutes later she was dead. Forensics showed that Megan died from strangulation, and that Ross slitting her throat with a knife could not be called anything other than a willful act. The prosecution argued that each of his actions was a calculated decision and that he was fully aware of what he was doing. His cell phone tracking showed that the day after Megan's disappearance, Ross repeated his nighttime route. Perhaps he was checking for clues or reliving that moment. It also showed that as he retraced his steps, he passed close to Megan's brother, her father and other family members as they searched for Megan. The prosecution also provided evidence that last weekend the couple met in the woods for an intimate encounter and that Ross ordered Viagra afterwards. The logical conclusion from all of this is that the encounter did not go well. The prosecution therefore suggested that Ross attacked her in a blind rage because he felt humiliated. In a statement, Ross replied that he did feel humiliated at the time, but that he would never do anything like that because of those feelings. The prosecution still insisted on their case, and also cited information that when Ross was sitting in a cell with another inmate, he joked that he could have gone a little further and ripped Megan's head off at that moment. This indicated that he wanted to behead the girl. Then he also said that he planned to avoid punishment by covering up his mental health. All these confessions turned against him, as he himself confessed to what he had done and investigators had no other suspects. The case was almost closed, but it remained to be seen what kind of punishment Ross deserved. The police examined Ross's phone and soon unpleasant details of their relationship with Megan surfaced. Their correspondence went from innocent to intimate rather quickly. It wasn't long before Ross also started acting rather strange, ordering Megan to call him Lord Commander, and it was just ridiculous. Further examination of the correspondence only added to the poor opinion of Ross. It turns out that after committing the murder and covering up the evidence, the guy kept texting her, wondering how she got there and feigning excitement at her lack of responses. Ross even Googled how to confess love to a girl at that moment, after which he performed what he learned. He spent the next hour and a half on the internet typing in ridiculous queries like weather forecasts and what sodas are made of. He also looked up information about serial killer Leo Benfield and only then went to bed. The next day at 6:30 a.m., he went online again and looked for more information about Leo Benfield, then looked at the news, and then went to adult websites. After that he texted Megan, "Good morning babe," and then called her pretending to be concerned. He then went back to researching serial killers. At one point, he was looking for categories of inmates and started looking for information about who cuts hair in prison and how to pay for it. His mental state was incomprehensible. He realized he was guilty, worried, and had already resigned himself to the fact that prison was inevitable. The prosecution asked Ross about his browsing adult websites after he had ended it with Megan. To which Ross laughed and replied that it did make him look bad, but that he was just trying to distract himself. There was no longer any way for him to avoid what was about to happen. The prosecutor asked Ross whether he believed that the reported cover-up was worse than the murder. To which Ross replied that yes, he did not control the murder, but he did control the cover-up. Nevertheless, the defense tried to paint a very different picture from the one presented by the prosecution. On the 8th day of the trial, they raised the issue of his childhood trauma. They stated that Ross was allegedly abused by Stephen Beeman, the man who also abused and then murdered Callie Heavier in 2015. Ross named a witness, but the witness admitted to the jury that Ross did not know who exactly abused him and that there were 3 people. For the trial, the story of this unproven incident was not enough. On Monday, December 12 at Leicester Crown Court, after a trial lasting 6 weeks, Ross was unanimously found guilty of murder. But he never gave a decent explanation for his act. On Friday, Dec. 16, Ross was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 23 years. No sentence can bring Megan back, but her family can have peace of mind knowing the killer is behind bars.